The snow came down like it had a grudge. By 6:15 in the morning, Meridian Tower's glass facade was sheeted in white, the Chicago skyline swallowed by a low gray ceiling that pressed down on the city like a palm flattening a prayer. The building's heating system ran full blast, but in the maintenance corridor on the ground floor, that narrow artery behind the marble lobby where the janitorial carts lived, the cold came through the walls in thin, invisible fingers. Ethan Cole pushed his mop bucket through the service door and into the lobby at 6:17, same as every morning. He was 38, though most people who bothered to look and most didn't guess older, not because he looked worn out exactly, but because he moved with a particular economy of motion, the kind that comes not from laziness but from a body that has learned long ago not to waste anything. Every step placed, every turn deliberate. A man who had, at some point in his life, operated in spaces where imprecision had consequences. His uniform was the standard-issue gray. His work boots were the only thing on him that looked cared for, polished, functional, laced with precision. His face was angular, weathered at the jaw, calm in the way that deep water is calm not because nothing moves beneath it, but because what moves beneath it does not need to show. He began with the lobby's east wing, the way he always did. Long, smooth passes with the mop. The motion was almost meditative. Above him, through 40 feet of glass atrium, the sky was doing something. He paused just for a moment when he heard it. Distant, threading through the wind, the low, rhythmic percussion of rotors, a helicopter somewhere above the city, adjusting its heading in the crosswind. He tracked it by sound alone without looking up. Vector, speed, the slight correction in pitch that told him the pilot was compensating for the gusts coming off the lake. Good pilot, he thought. Then he went back to mopping. The lobby began to fill around 7:30. First the security team, then the junior analysts who wore their ambition like cologne. By 8, the elevator banks were running continuous, and the marble floors Ethan had polished to a low gleam were being tracked across by 200 pairs of expensive shoes. No one said good morning. This was not a complaint, just a fact. Ethan had been with the building service contractor for 14 months, and in that time, the invisibility had settled around him like a second skin. He was the man who made things clean, the man who existed in the negative space between everyone else's importance. He preferred it that way, mostly. Cole. He turned. Derek Paulson, the facilities supervisor, was crossing the lobby with his clipboard and his perpetual expression of low-grade harassment. Executive floors doing a full-board demonstration this morning. Rooftop helipads being used at 11. I need you up there at 10:15. Clear the pad. De-ice the walkway from the elevator bank to the pad perimeter. Yes, sir. And wear the company jacket. The navy one. Not the gray. Yes, sir. Derek was already walking away. He did not ask if Ethan had the equipment, or if the de-icing materials were restocked, or whether the temperature differential between the heated lobby and the exposed rooftop in a 20-knot wind was going to make that walkway extremely dangerous within 4 minutes of being cleared. He didn't ask because he didn't need to know. That was Ethan's problem. Ethan went to check the de-icing supply himself. At 9:45, on the 43rd floor, the executive conference suite was in the kind of organized chaos that expensive organizations mistake for control. The room was a monument to glass and intention. One wall looked out over the gray city. A second wall carried a 60-inch presentation screen currently cycling through Meridian Aerospace's Q4 projections. Around the oval table sat 11 people in suits that cost more than Ethan's monthly take-home. Laptops open, voices clipped and purposeful. At the head of the table, or rather, moving along its side, because she did not sit when things needed to be done, was Victoria Hargrove. She was 36. She had been CEO of Meridian Aerospace Solutions for 2 years, and had in that time taken the company's market valuation from a comfortable plateau to a vertical climb that had made the financial press lose vocabulary. She was not, by any standard measure, a comfortable person to be around. She was precise, the way a scalpel is precise. She wore charcoal today, a fitted blazer, no jewelry except a thin watch on her left wrist that she checked with the frequency of a person who believes time is personally wasting itself on everyone around her. Her COO, Brian Lattimore, was speaking. The Whitmore Group delegation lands at O'Hare at 10:50. Ground transport is 22 minutes in current conditions. We have the boardroom from 11:30. The aerial demonstration with the EC-135 is scheduled for... Where's Doyle? A pause. He's, Brian's assistant, a young man named Spencer, whose job was primarily to absorb the impact of these pauses, consulted his phone. His inbound flight from Cincinnati was diverted to Indianapolis due to the weather system. He's been trying to reroute, but he's our demonstration pilot. For the helicopter demonstration that we are doing in Victoria, checked her watch, 83 minutes. The room was very quiet. Victoria turned to the window. The snow was thickening. The helicopter on the rooftop helipad, a Eurocopter EC-135, one of Meridian's own fleet demonstrators, currently worth approximately $3.2 million, sat under its tarp like a very expensive embarrassment. "Get me a backup pilot," she said. "We've already called." "I don't want to hear what you've already called. I want a pilot on that rooftop in 90 minutes. Victoria, every certified EC-135 pilot in our network is either out of range or then find someone outside our network." The room began making calls. Ethan was on the rooftop at 10:12, 3 minutes ahead of schedule. The wind up here was a different creature than the wind on the street. It came off the lake in long, muscular gusts, pushing 45 miles per hour in the peaks, carrying ice crystals that stung the exposed parts of his face. He kept his head down and worked methodically. De-icer on the walkway, spread it evenly. Check the helipad surface. Clear the loose snow from around the pad perimeter. The EC-135 sat under its cover 20 feet away. He did not look at it directly. He hadn't looked at a helicopter directly in a long time, but in the periphery of his awareness, the way you are always aware of a door you have chosen not to open, it was there. He knew the EC-135. Knew its rotor system, its Turbomeca Arius 2B2 engines, its hydraulic assist, its avionics package, the particular way it responded to lateral cyclic input in a crosswind. He knew these things the way he knew how to breathe, not from recent effort, but from a time when knowing them was the difference between coming home and not. He swept snow. He did not think about the helicopter. Below, in the city, the snow kept coming down. At 10:50, Victoria Hargrove came onto the rooftop with Brian Lattimore, 2 members of the Whitmore Group delegation who had arrived early, and the particular expression of a person whose carefully constructed morning is beginning to develop structural faults. She saw Ethan immediately. She did not register him as a person. At first he was correctly categorized in her mind, part of the maintenance infrastructure, a moving part of the building. Then she looked at the helipad and stopped. He had cleared it completely. Not just the visible snow, the ice film beneath it, the drainage channels at the pad corners, the skid markers, the perimeter lighting strips. The walkway from the elevator bank was dry and safe. The tarp had been folded and secured against the wind with a precision that suggested the person doing it understood the aerodynamics of fabric in high wind. It was, she noted involuntarily, a better prep job than their usual ground crew did. Brian was at her shoulder. Still no certified pilot. The agency is telling us the earliest they can get someone here is... I heard you the first time. She stood at the edge of the helipad. The EC-135 sat in the cleared space, its rotor head clean, its white and blue livery sharp against the gray sky. Below, through the glass parapet, the city moved in its slow, snowed-in way. And then, in the middle of the silence that was settling over the rooftop like the beginning of a very public failure, Victoria Hargrove had an idea. Not a good idea. She would reflect on this later. Not even a coherent idea. It was the idea of a person who is under significant pressure and who has, in her life, occasionally mistaken cruelty for wit. She turned and looked at the janitor. He was coiling a length of extension cord, his back to her. She looked at the helicopter. She looked back at him. The two Whitmore delegates were watching her, their expressions carefully neutral in the way of men who have learned that neutrality is the safest expression to wear around executives in distress. Victoria walked across the helipad and stopped 2 feet from the janitor. He straightened slowly when he noticed her presence, turned to face her. His eyes were steady, not deferential steady. There was a difference, she would realize later. Deferential eyes looked down or away. These eyes looked directly at her, without challenge, without submission. They were the color of slate in winter light. She held out the helicopter's ignition key. "Fly this," she said. The key was a compact thing. Keypad remote, fuel selector tag, the Meridian Aviation Services lanyard in blue and white. It fell through the air between them. She didn't hand it. She let it drop, a performance gesture, the punctuation of a person making a point in front of an audience. Ethan caught it without looking. Behind Victoria, Brian Lattimore had gone the particular shade of pale that came from understanding that a situation was developing implications that would need to be managed. One of the Whitmore delegates had his phone out. The other was watching with the fixed attention of a man who has just been handed something more interesting than the meeting he was expecting. Spencer, who had come up in the elevator 30 seconds behind the group, stopped at the rooftop door. Victoria was speaking again. "Our demonstration pilot is stuck in Indianapolis. The Whitmore Group delegation is here." A pause. "Our helicopter is here." Another pause. "The performance kind. So if you know how to fly it, fly it. I'll make it worth your while." The last sentence was the cruelest part, Ethan thought. The conditional generosity, as if she thought he might be foolish enough to be flattered by the implication that a man in a gray maintenance jacket might, improbably, possess a skill she needed, as if she had invented a little game for herself to fill the uncomfortable space of a delayed pilot. And he was the prop. From behind her, someone laughed. A short, decisive sound, one of the junior members of the Meridian team who had come up with the delegation. A young man in a slim-cut suit whose name tag read Parker. "Sir, do you know what kind of aircraft this is?" Ethan looked at the helicopter. For the first time since coming onto the rooftop, he looked at it directly. The EC-135 sat in the cleared pad with its rotors stilled, a precise, capable machine in 20-year-old livery that didn't look 20 years old because it had been maintained by people who understood that the difference between a helicopter that kills you and a helicopter that doesn't is mostly maintenance. He could see from here that someone had pre-flighted the avionics the day before the static ports were covered. The pitot heat had been flagged off in the standard pre-frost protocol. Someone on their ground crew knew what they were doing. He looked back at Victoria. Her expression had settled into something that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite contempt. It was the expression of a person who has issued a challenge they expect to be refused, and is deciding in advance whether the refusal will be awkward or funny. Ethan looked at the key in his hand. In his mind, just for a moment, the length of a single breath, a different sky opened. Not this gray winter ceiling, but a clear western sky, hard blue above the Mojave, and the feeling of a collective weight leaving the ground, and a voice in his headset saying, "Ghost Hawk, you are cleared to break. Have fun." He closed his hand around the key. "I'll need to do a pre-flight check," he said. His voice was level, no excitement, no performance. The silence that followed was a specific kind of silence, the kind where a room recalibrates. Victoria blinked. "Just once." "Excuse me? The pre-flight. It'll take 8 minutes. You'd want it done anyway." She stopped. Parker had stopped laughing. Brian Lattimore had his hand over his mouth and was looking at the helicopter with an expression that was trying to be skeptical and not quite managing it. Ethan was already walking toward the aircraft. He pulled the tarp clips on the rotor head with efficient, practiced hands. The way you pull clips when you have done it in darkness, in heat, in rain, in the particular brutal cold of altitude. He moved to the port side door, checked the seal, Move to the engine nacelles. Wait, Victoria was following him. Wait, I'm not actually telling you to. You said fly it, Ethan said, not stopping. These are the conditions. Wind 22 knots from the northwest, gusting to 44. Temperature -6 Celsius at pad level, colder at altitude. The pad's clear. The aircraft looks to have been pre-staged. He crouched at the left main gear, checked the tire, checked the hydraulic line fitting. If you want a demonstration, I can do a demonstration. If you were making a joke, that's fine too. But I'll need to know before I pull the engine covers. He straightened and looked at her. Victoria Hargrove, CEO, was standing 4 feet from a janitor who was conducting a helicopter pre-flight inspection with the casual thoroughness of a person for whom this was unremarkable, and she had no script for this. "Who are you?" she said. "Ethan Cole. Maintenance." "That's not what I mean." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he went back to the pre-flight. 8 minutes, he said. "Clock's running if you want it." 21 years ago, when Ethan Cole was 17 years old, he had stood on the edge of a runway in the Nevada heat and watched a flight of FA-18s break formation overhead with a sound that moved through his chest like a second heartbeat, and he had known with the simple, absolute certainty of a person who has just found the thing that was made for them that the sky was where he belonged. He had not been wrong. He went in at 18. Advanced training at Pensacola. A natural in fixed wing, exceptional in rotary. The kind of exceptional that instructors argue about in the evenings, whether it's teachable, whether it's something in the wiring, whether you can point to the technique, or whether technique is too small a word for it. By 24, he was at the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center. Top Gun, for the people who still used that name. His call sign came from the first live exercise evaluation. An instructor had watched him disappear into a cloud bank at low altitude and lose radar track for 7 minutes, then reappear at a completely unexpected vector with a clean kill solution, and had turned to the other instructors and said, simply, "Ghost Hawk." It stuck. For 6 years, Ethan flew missions that do not appear in accessible records. Rotary operations in conditions that civilian aviation would have grounded. Night insertions, extract operations, the kind of flying where the skill level required was matched by the stakes of failing to achieve it. He was not reckless. He was the opposite. He was precise, in a way that looked like calm, and calm in a way that looked like indifference, and indifferent in a way that, in the air, translated to a helicopter that went exactly where he wanted it to go. When he wanted it there, in conditions that said it shouldn't be possible. He met Claire when he was 27. She was a Navy nurse, which people thought was cliched until they met her, after which the description seemed entirely insufficient. She was funny and direct and had the rare quality of not needing Ethan to be less than he was. And for 3 years they were happy in the specific, intense way of two people who know that the life they've chosen has an expiration date on the happiness because everything in it is contingent on coming home. The accident was in year 4 of their marriage. He does not speak of it in these terms. He does not, mostly, speak of it at all. A mission in mountainous terrain. A weather system that moved faster than the models predicted. A mechanical failure that the post-incident board would classify as a maintenance oversight. He brought the aircraft down. He got everyone out. One of his crew did not survive the extraction. His name was Danny Forsyth. He was 26. He had a photograph in his helmet bag of his younger sister's 8th grade graduation ceremony. Ethan had looked at it during the overnight before the mission and said nothing because there was nothing to say, because they were professionals, because the professional thing was to be ready and focused, and not to look at photographs. He left the service 9 months later. Claire died of an aggressive cancer 2 years after that pancreatic fast, the kind that gives you enough time to understand what's happening but not enough time to find any comfort in understanding it. She was 32. She had, in the last months, made him promise to raise their daughter without bitterness. She had said it with the particular authority of a person who knew they were asking something very difficult and wanted to be clear that they were asking it anyway. Lily was 4 when her mother died. She was now 7. She had her mother's directness and her father's eyes, and an absolute conviction that her father was, in some way she couldn't yet articulate, the best person she had ever met. He had told her nothing about the flying. He had told her, when she asked why he cleaned buildings for work, that there was a lot of dignity in making things clean. She had thought about this seriously, the way she thought about everything, and said that it seemed like it would get boring. He had said most things get boring eventually. The question is whether they leave you enough room to be a good father. She had considered this. "You're a very good father," she said. "I'm trying," he said. "That's the same thing," she said. He did not correct her. On the rooftop of Meridian Tower, Ethan Cole finished his pre-flight in 7 minutes and 40 seconds. He opened the pilot door and stood for a moment at the threshold. The smell hit him first, the composite smell of a helicopter interior, hydraulic fluid and warm avionics, and the faint petroleum trace of fuel. It was one of those smells that bypasses cognition entirely and goes straight to the part of the brain where the old self lives. He got in. The seat adjusted with 2 lever pulls. He ran through the systems check from memory, hands moving across the panel with a fluency that had nothing to do with the 14 months he'd spent pushing a mop in this building and everything to do with the 6 years he'd spent putting aircraft into impossible places. Outside, through the windscreen, the snow was moving in long, diagonal lines. Victoria Hargrove was standing at the pad perimeter with Brian Lattimore and the 2 Whitmore delegates. Spencer was behind them, still holding his phone, no longer looking at it. Parker had moved to the edge of the rooftop parapet. He was watching the cockpit with an expression that had traveled some distance from where it started. Ethan put on the headset. He ran the engine start sequence. The Arias engines spooled up that sound, that specific ascending frequency of turbine spin-up, the vibration that travels up through the seat and tells you the machine is waking. The rotor head began to turn, slow at first, then faster, until the blades were a disk of gray motion above the aircraft. He watched the instruments settle. Outside, the snow was being thrown outward from the rotor wash in a white halo that expanded across the helipad. On the other side of the windscreen, no one moved. He keyed the radio. Meridian 77. Pre-flight complete. Ready to lift when you give the word. A long pause on the ground frequency. Then Victoria Hargrove, standing at the pad perimeter, lifted her hand and made a small, incredulous gesture that might have been permission, or might have been a person discovering that a situation has moved significantly beyond their control. Ethan Cole lifted the collective. The EC-135 broke ground. At 40 feet above the pad, the wind hit the aircraft properly for the first time, and a lesser pilot would have felt it as a threat. Ethan felt it as information. He read the gust pattern in the way the aircraft's nose wanted to yaw left, then a sharp correction back. The lake wind coming in 2-second intervals at irregular amplitude. He adjusted the tail rotor with the right pedal before the yaw completed, so the correction was invisible from the ground. The aircraft appeared to simply hover, motionless and precise, in a 40-knot wind that was doing its best. Below, the faces had turned upward. He held the hover for 30 seconds. The instrument scan. Altitude, rate of climb, airspeed, rotor RPM, engine torque. The EC-135 was performing cleanly. Whoever had maintained this aircraft knew their work. Then he moved it. Not a dramatic maneuver. Not something for show. He simply took the aircraft 50 meters to the north, along the building's roofline, exactly level, at constant airspeed, into the wind, into it, not across it, and held position there for 15 seconds, then brought it back the same way. On the ground, one of the Whitmore delegates, a man named Frederick Baum, who had spent 11 years in the German Bundeswehr before moving to private aviation investment, turned to the man beside him. "That hover in the crosswind," Baum said quietly. He corrected before the drift started. The other man, his associate, Thomas Rael said nothing. He was watching too carefully to speak. Below, Brian Lattimore was speaking into his phone. "I need you to pull any record we have for a Meridian maintenance employee named Ethan Cole. No, now. Don't just run the search." Victoria Hargrove had not moved from her position at the pad perimeter. Her arms were at her sides. Her face had gone still in the way that faces go still when the mind behind them is running very fast. She had issued a challenge as a joke, a bit of pressure relief in a bad morning, a moment of casual control that she would see this clearly later. Sitting alone in her office, the city dark below her had directed at a person she had assigned no particular personhood to, and that person was currently demonstrating in a snow-loaded 40-knot wind above the 43rd floor of her building, a level of aircraft control that her actual, certified, professionally employed demonstration pilot could not have matched on his best day. She watched the EC-135 descend 30 feet, hold, then move laterally along the roofline, slow, deliberate, the blade arc never once tilting above the angle of safe operation. The aircraft knew where the building's wind shadow was, and then it moved out of the wind shadow deliberately, and the rotor disc tilted into the gust, and the helicopter went absolutely nowhere. It just held. Parker had taken out his own phone and then put it away again. He was not filming. He was watching. Brian's voice at her shoulder. "I can't find anything. Keep looking. The name is common. If there's nothing in our HR files beyond." "There's something," Victoria said. "Keep looking." At altitude, in the gray above the city, Ethan ran the demonstration sequence that a demonstration pilot would have run. He was working from memory. The EC-135's promotional capabilities included low-speed performance profiles, steep approach angles, confined area operations, and the visibility profile from the cabin doors, all of which were relevant to Meridian's pitch to the Whitmore Group. He ran them cleanly. He ran them correctly. He ran them the way someone runs a task that is not interesting or challenging anymore, but that deserves to be done well, regardless. Then, descending back toward the pad on the final approach, he encountered something that was not in the demonstration profile. At 200 feet, the wind shear layer. The temperature differential between the building's heat signature and the ambient air was creating a turbulence band at approximately the height of the upper floors, not severe, but unpredictable. He'd seen it on the way up and made a note of it. On the way down, it was worse. The gusts were less regular, the amplitude higher, the timing broken. He flew through it the way he'd flown through worse. On the ground, watching the approach, Frederick Baum spoke again. "That's a 7-meter displacement in the band," he said. He corrected, in approximately, he checked his watch. "The aviation habit, 1.4 seconds. Thomas Rael looked at him. "That's not a demonstration pilot," Baum said. "That's a combat-trained pilot." The helicopter touched down on the pad with the specific softness of a landing that has been calculated to the inch. The skids met the surface without a sound that anyone outside the cockpit could hear. The engines spooled down. The rotors decelerated. The snow that had been swept outward by the rotor wash began to settle back toward the center of the pad, and Ethan Cole sat in the cockpit for one moment, just one, the length of a single exhale, and let the silence come in around the dying turbine sound. Then he opened the door and climbed down. The group at the pad perimeter had not moved. Victoria Hargrove stood at the front. Behind her, Brian Lattimore had his phone pressed to his ear. Spencer had his mouth slightly open. Parker was standing with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the ground. Frederick Baum stepped forward. "Your call sign," he said. It was not a question. Exactly. Military? Rotary? Naval, I'd guess. "What was your call sign?" Ethan looked at him. "Read the military bearing." "The aviation assessment in the question." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Ghost Hawk." Baum's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did. "I know that name," he said quietly. The search that Brian Lattimore's assistant ran at 11:43 that morning returned. Initially, nothing. No extended military record. No aviation license in the standard civilian database. No professional pilot's log in any registry they could access through conventional HR channels. It was Frederick Baum who made the call. He knew a man in naval aviation records, a retired commander who still maintained contacts in the military documentation branch. The call lasted 4 minutes. Afterward, Baum came to Victoria Hargrove in the executive conference room, where she had retreated, ostensibly to review the Whitmore contract terms, actually to sit with the feeling that she had done something she was not yet ready to name. Baum laid his phone on the table in front of her, screen up, showing a photograph. It was a military service photograph. A young man in dress uniform, 24, 25 years old. The jaw was the same. The eyes were unmistakably the same, that steady, gray water quality. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cole, Baum said. Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center, then transferred to Special Operations Aviation, then classified missions for 4 years. His record is partially sealed. What I can access shows 17 confirmed combat hours in the EC-135 family alone. Total rotary hours in excess of 3,000. Qualified in 6 airframe types. Awards include the Air Medal with Valor Device, the Distinguished Flying Cross. Victoria looked at the photograph. He flew a mission in a mountain range in his record, puts it at a 5,000-meter peak elevation in a Category 3 weather event. Baum paused. He brought a damaged aircraft down on a 90 by 20-meter plateau in the dark. Brought 6 people out. Lost one. The conference room was quiet. He left the service 14 years ago, Baum continued. No subsequent aviation employment on record. His wife died, he checked his notes, 11 years ago. Victoria's hand was flat on the table. He's been working in building maintenance for 14 months in this building. Before that, similar work in other facilities. He has a daughter, 7 years old. Victoria stood up from the table slowly. Where is he now? Still in the building, I expect. His shift ends at 3. She looked at the photograph again. The young man in dress uniform looked back at her with the same eyes that had looked at her an hour ago on the rooftop, when she'd dropped a helicopter key in the space between them as a performance. Not challenging, not angry, steady. The way a person looks when they've decided that other people's opinions of them carry a weight that they stopped lifting a long time ago. She found him in the maintenance corridor on the 31st floor, restocking a supply cart. He heard her coming. She registered that his head turned before her footsteps were loud enough for most people to hear. Training, she thought. The habit of knowing what was in your environment. He waited while she stopped in front of him. I read your file, she said. No answer. The Distinguished Flying Cross, she said. The military gives those out. Not for what your file describes. He looked at the supply cart. Then back at her. What do you want, Miss Hargrove? I want to understand why you're... She stopped, recalibrated. There was a version of this sentence that was going to sound like either pity or condescension, and she was honest enough, in this moment, to know that she didn't want to say either. I want to apologize. For this morning, his expression did not change. The helicopter stunt, she said. You needed a pilot. There was a pilot. I was not offering you a real opportunity. I was. She stopped again. This was harder than she was used to things being. I was being dismissive. In front of people, Ethan looked at her for a moment. Not forgiving, not withholding, just looking. The way you look at something you are deciding whether to spend energy on. My daughter asks me sometimes why I clean buildings, he said. I tell her there's dignity in it. I believe that. He picked up a supply box. I don't need an apology for this morning, Miss Hargrove. I've had worse than that. That's not the point. What is the point? The point is that I owed you one, and I'm giving it. He held her gaze. Accepted, he said. He went back to the cart. Victoria stood in the maintenance corridor and watched him work for a moment. Then she said, Frederick Baum wants to meet with you. He's a managing partner at Whitmore. They have aviation contracts, consultation, training program design, safety review. He says your skill profile is, she chose the word carefully, rare. Ethan was quiet. I'm not asking you to leave your job, she said. I'm telling you that the option is there. I'll think about it. She nodded. Miss Hargrove. She turned. His face was still neutral, but something had shifted in the eyes, not warmth, exactly. Something quieter. An acknowledgement. The Whitmore demonstration, he said. Your company needed that to go well. It went well. A pause. You're welcome, he said, and went back to work. That evening, Ethan Cole left the building at 3:14 and walked 6 blocks through the snow to the elementary school where his daughter was finishing the extended day program. She came out of the building at 3:45, wearing a red coat and a backpack that appeared to weigh nearly as much as she did, moving with the focused gait of a person who has important things to report and is organizing them in order of priority. Dad, she said, immediately, I need to tell you something. Tell me. We had a substitute today because Mrs. Hendricks was sick. She didn't know how to work the projector, and everyone was being mean about it, and I showed her the button on the side and it worked. That was good of you. I know. She took his hand. She said I was very helpful. She wrote it on a little card and gave it to me. She produced the card from her coat pocket. It was pink, with a small sticker of a star on it. Ethan looked at it. That's a good card, he said. I'm going to put it in my important box. The important box lived on the shelf in her room beside her books and the framed photograph of her mother. It contained 12 items that Lily had decided, by her own metrics, were important. 3 birthday cards, a smooth stone she'd found at the lake, a pressed leaf from her class field trip, a note from her first teacher. And now, a pink card with a star sticker. They walked home. At the kitchen table, while Lily did her homework and Ethan made pasta, she said without looking up from her worksheet, Dad, did you do something interesting today? He thought about the EC 135 rising through 45-knot gusts from a helipad 43 floors above Chicago, the weight of the collective in his hand. The way the city looked from 200 feet, all that gray and white and the distant lake, the sound of the turbines and the silence underneath the turbines, and the particular feeling not nostalgia, not pride, something more complicated than both of being in his right place in the world for the first time in a very long time. A little, he said. What was it? I flew a helicopter. Lily put her pencil down. She looked at him. You know how to fly a helicopter? I used to fly them a lot. Why didn't you tell me? He stirred the pasta. I wasn't flying them anymore, so it didn't seem important. She was quiet for a moment, processing this with the careful seriousness she brought to most things. Is it important now? She said. He looked at her mother's directness, the pencil still in her hand, the star card sticker on the homework paper corner because she'd put it there while working. Maybe, he said. I think you should do it, she said. If you're good at it, I'm okay at it. He looked at her. I know when you're being modest, she said. You do that thing where you say exactly the least possible true thing. He smiled a quiet smile, the kind that doesn't perform itself. Okay, he said. I was good at it. Then you should do it, she said, and picked up her pencil. 3 days after the rooftop demonstration, Frederick Baum called. The conversation was 22 minutes long. Baum was direct, which Ethan appreciated. He was not offering a favor. He was describing a specific professional gap in the Whitmore Group's aviation safety consultation practice, the gap being the absence of anyone with operational combat rotary experience who could bring credibility to their combat, military aviation client reviews. You'd be advising, not flying, Baum said. Though the flying would be there if you wanted it. We have 3 aircraft in the fleet. The work is flexible. You could retain other employment if you chose to. Ethan said he'd think about it. I want to say one other thing, Baum said. Go ahead. I was in the Bundeswehr. 13 years. When I got out, I spent 18 months doing work that was not suited to me. I thought it was humility. My wife told me it was something else. A pause. She was right. Ethan said nothing. Take your time, Baum said. The offer doesn't expire. On the morning of the 5th day, Ethan stopped by Victoria Hargrove's office. He did not have an appointment. Her assistant, a composed woman named Andrea, looked at him with the particular expression of a person whose job is to prevent the unscheduled from accessing the scheduled, and said Miss Hargrove was in a call. I can wait, Ethan said. He sat in the chair across from Andrea's desk and waited for 11 minutes. He was very comfortable waiting. Victoria came out of her office at the end of the call, saw him, and stopped. She was in a different suit today, navy, sharper than the charcoal. She looked, he thought, slightly less armored than she had on the rooftop, as if something had been adjusted in the architecture of how she held herself. Mr. Cole, I wanted to let you know something, he said, standing. I'm going to take the Whitmore consulting offer. She nodded slowly. Part-time, to start. I'll keep the maintenance work while I'm transitioning. He paused. I wanted you to know directly, not through channels. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Why? She said. Because you were honest with me when you apologized. That was harder than it sounds for most people in your position. He held her gaze. I thought you deserved a direct reply. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he hadn't seen on her face before. Not quite soft, but open. As if a specific kind of wall had been stood down. There's something else, she said. The Whitmore contract. The one we were pitching. She paused. We got it. Good. Baum said she stopped, chose a version of the sentence. He said the demonstration was the most convincing element of the presentation. Not the deck, not the projections. She met his eyes. You. Ethan said nothing. You saved us a significant contract, Victoria said. Without being asked. Without? She stopped again. The thought was complicated. Without being treated as a person who might be capable of such a thing. You needed it done, Ethan said. There was someone who could do it. He turned to go. Mr. Cole. He turned back. Victoria Hargrove, CEO, controlled, precise, the woman who had dropped a helicopter key between them as a joke and watched the joke become something she hadn't expected. Looked at him with something that was not quite professional, courtesy and not quite anything else. She had a name for yet. Thank you, she said. Ethan nodded once. The way a person nods when an acknowledgement has been received and is sufficient. He walked to the elevator. 2 weeks later, on a clear morning when the snow had stopped and the city had that particular winter brightness that comes from light bouncing off every surface, Lily Cole stood at the window of the Whitmore Group's aviation office on the 27th floor of a building 3 blocks from Meridian Tower. She was there because it was a Saturday, and her father had taken her to work with him because his consulting session was an hour long, and she had her book and her important box tucked in her backpack, and she was, in her own assessment, excellent at being in professional environments. She stood at the window and watched a helicopter cross the city from east to west, low over the river, a small machine against a big sky. Her father came out of the conference room behind her and stood beside her. Is that like the one you flew? She said. Smaller. Different family of aircraft. Did it feel good? Flying again? He looked at the helicopter until it disappeared beyond the tree line of Grant Park. Yes, he said. She took his hand. Good, she said. With the simple, final authority of a 7-year-old who has decided something. Because you looked different after. Not sad different. The other kind. He looked down at her. What other kind? She thought about it, her expression serious, reaching for the right words with the careful effort of someone who knows that imprecision is a form of disrespect. Like you, she said finally. You looked like you. They stood at the window together for a moment. The sky over Chicago was hard and blue and very clear. Ethan Cole looked at his daughter, her mother's precision, her own particular certainty, the star sticker still on the corner of the book in her backpack, and felt, quietly and without drama, the thing that Claire had made him promise to keep looking for. The thing on the other side of the loss. He put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. The city moved below them, bright and continuous, and above it the sky held everything the sky had always held: altitude and velocity, and the specific mathematics of staying up when the world pulls down. It had waited 14 years. It was not, he thought, an impatient thing. The sky, it just waited, and when you came back to it, it was there.